Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The WBO has confirmed Oleksandr Usyk as its mandatory challenger at heavyweight. So Oleksandr Usyk will get a guaranteed shot at whoever the winner of Andy Ruiz Jr. and Anthony Joshua, the rematch that's taking place later this year. So his title shot would seemingly be in early 2020. So this is quite big news. There were a number of other fighters in contention for that mandatory shot. There were some questions about what would happen with Oleksandr Usyk, that bicep injury that he sustained. Would he step up and take the mandatory challenge that he was afforded as the WBO Super Champion, courtesy of unifying the cruiserweight division? And yes, he has taken it. So Dillian Whyte and Tyson Fury, who had been spoken of by fans and even their promoters as potentially being in line for the WBO mandatory, they are out of luck. And actually, Dillian Whyte had been contesting this decision by the WBO because it's been working its way through a process. It's come to a resolution, and Dillian Whyte was contesting Usyk being the mandatory. And I'll get to it in this. So the resolution is on its website. So you can see here, WBO Championship Committee resolution, designation of Mr. Oleksandr Usyk as mandatory challenger in the WBO heavyweight division. The present ruling is issued upon a petition filed on Monday, June 3rd, 2019 by Mr. John Hornawur Esquire on behalf of former undisputed WBO, WBA, WBC and IBF junior heavyweight champion, so cruiserweight, of the world, Mr. Oleksandr Usyk, and Team Usyk, whereby official designation as mandatory challenger in the WBO World Heavyweight Division is requested. So that was something that was open to him. He's requested it, and they've worked through a process in the past 3 weeks to go through that. Dillian Whyte's camp, they were given the opportunity to respond, and they did. So this here sort of breaks down some of the history and all of this here, this whereas, this is Oleksandr Usyk's different achievements and talking up his career in general as an amateur, and that's played a part in this as well. And then it goes through the championship committee resolution, the process that was gone through. And where are we here? So on June 4th, representatives of reigning WBO International Heavyweight Champion Mr. Dillian Whyte acknowledged receipt of Mr. Usyk's filed petition and requested that the WBO Championship Committee refrain from issuing any ruling regarding said matter in order to reply accordingly. So they were given some time. And effectively, and remember, Dillian Whyte has referred to Oleksandr Usyk before as a nobody, someone who's not interested in fighting, someone who isn't going to do anything at heavyweight. And as part of the petition to the WBO, his lawyer contended that though the super champion status recognition is discretionary, the WBO shall consider Mr. Whyte's professional merits, including the opponents faced in the heavyweight division, for mandatory designation. Moreover, they argue that Mr. Usyk lacks experience at the reference division, is seeking one or two intervening bouts before mandatory designation. Lastly, Mr. Usyk's injury would constitute unavailability and therefore not able to fulfill the obligation of a mandatory challenger, and consequently his request shall be denied. And in terms of Oleksandr Usyk, so he did tear his right bicep a couple of months ago. That stopped his fight ultimately happening on May 25th. That was going to be his first fight at heavyweight against Carlos Takam. He got injured, but further down here, they actually say that a medical certificate was submitted by Usyk's team saying that he would be physically fit to box and return to active competition. And it continues down, talking about all sorts of bits and pieces. The WBO has gone through the things that they've considered, so feel free to go sort of peruse that at your leisure. But the real meat of this decision is down at the bottom. Mr. Usyk has substantially met the criteria set forth in our WBO Super Champion status provision and currently stands ready, willing and able to engage in his next professional bout, the mandatory championship contest, if designated by this committee. whereas Mr. White's current WBO heavyweight rating does not constitute automatic designation of mandatory challenger. Mr. White is currently committed fighting WBO heavyweight champion NABO Mr. Oscar Rivas on July 20th at the O2 in United Kingdom, consequently unavailable to engage a WBO mandatory championship bout upon issuance of this resolution. So his team, White's team, had been calling for the WBO to hold fire and actually not rule on this until July the 22nd. That's earlier in this document. It says, whereas the privileges and rights afforded by the WBO Super Champion provision supersede any other thereto of any WBO participant. The WBO World Championship Committee hereby designates WBO Super Champion Mr. Oleksandr as the mandatory challenger of the WBO Heavyweight Division in accordance with the privileges and rights afforded pursuant to his WBO Super Champion status recognition. This is a final decision of the WBO Championship Committee. The affected WBO participant may appeal such determination, yada, 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 all that sort of stuff within a certain amount of time. So the upshot there is Oleksandr Usyk, who could claim the WBO mandatory spot, has done so. He applied for it at the start of June. There's a process that's been worked through. The appeal by Dillian Whyte, the petition that was made by his lawyers for it not to be given to Usyk, that it should be considered, he should be considered on his merits, and especially after his fight with Oscar Rivas, and should he win that, that he should be in line for it. So this has not worked for Dillian Whyte. An avenue for him to fight for a world title through the WBO is for now not there. It is now with Oleksandr Usyk, who has claimed the mandatory. So it becomes a case now of what's going to happen next with this. And there has been some talk, from Eddie Hearn, that is the co-promoter for Oleksandr Usyk and the promoter for Dillian Whyte, that potentially the belts may be fractured at some point next year. We will have to see. But on the basis of where things stand today, what we're hearing is that all the belts will be on the line for the rematch between Joshua and Ruiz, and that the WBO is the next cab off the rank in terms of mandatory obligations. And the IBF has publicly said that it is behind the WBO in the queue of mandatory defences. So it would seemingly be that the winner of Joshua and Ruiz Jr. faces Oleksandr Usyk next at some point in 2020. Obviously, it's boxing, lots of ifs, buts, and maybes, but a very clear designation from the WBO. Oleksandr Usyk is the guy who will be having that championship fight. So we have Usyk as the WBO mandatory, Kubrat Pulev as the IBF mandatory. The WBA, there is no mandatory at this point in time. And maybe with all their belts, they need to just rationalize things there. But big news for Oleksandr Usyk. He is the WBO mandatory. And I know there will be some fans who, Fury fans and also White fans, who will say this is a little unfair. But this was something that was coming down the pipe for some time. This is not something that's just out of the blue. Usyk could claim the status, and he has. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.